served as PF&R chair, but eventually, I believe in the 90s, you became a division head. Talk about that journey.
So I'm going to say it this way. It was not really by choice, okay? And what I mean by that is I don't necessarily like that sort of leadership position. And I certainly did not in those days. Not in those days. As I indicated, I prefer to be in the background. I prefer, it's kind of the difference between the print journalist and the broadcast journalist. I don't want to be on camera. But Phil Jeter pushed me. He might not agree with that, but he did. Harry Amana pushed me. And when I say pushed me, I mean encouraged me. And encouraged me with the understanding that I had their support for whatever I needed, but also with the understanding that they were coming from a place of saying, you can do this. You're someone who needs to be doing this. And so initially, I wanted to, in terms of a leadership position, with my background in newspaper journalism, hey, I'll be the editor of the newsletter for the division. Yeah, that's what I do. I think I can do it well. And so I agreed to be editor of the newsletter. And I think that was maybe after being chair of PF&R, Professional Freedom and Responsibility Committee. And I say committee, sometimes committee means two people. Sometimes committee means Harry Amana and me, right? Sometimes committee means whoever you can get to help you organize something. So I became newsletter editor, but at the time that I became newsletter editor for the Minorities and Communication Division of AEJMC, the division was establishing a system where those in leadership positions would move up to become chair of Minorities and Communication. And if I remember right, that put me in a three-year period of progression to become chair. And so from newsletter editor, I think the next step was vice chair and then chair. And I can remember saying when it was my time to become chair, I don't know that I really want to do this. I can just continue as newsletter editor. I succeeded, I think it was Jan Dates from Howard. And she said, no, you don't have a choice. You're in the position and, this is how it works. I said, yes. Okay. And became chair.
Without getting too deep in the weeds, I do want to make sure I get a little more information about the newsletter. Was this a MAC newsletter that you were editing, or was this Still Here? Because at one time, Still Here was published by the MAC division. I'm wondering at that time, were those connected or had they already separated and now you had a separate MAC divisional newsletter?
As I was talking about that, as becoming editor of the newsletter, I thought about that. That is, that the Still Here might have been the newsletter for the division at some point. But no, by the time I became newsletter editor, it was the MAC newsletter, Minorities and Communication Division newsletter.
Well, we're at a point now where we're in 2020 and we're talking about 50 years. And before we leave the topic of the MAC division, I'm wondering, thinking back to the time when you were head of a division and even when it's become more recently, what are some things that you can remember the most about the division in terms of its role in your development, its role in mentoring other faculty or graduate students? What are some of your thoughts about the MAC division?
So when I became chair, there was an effort, and I don't know that I fully understood it at the time or understood the ramifications of the effort, but there was an effort to improve the status of the MAC division, because there had been some conversation within AEJMC dismantling the division. But not, as I understand it, as I recall it, it wasn't so much to sort of get rid of it so that minorities would not have a voice. It was that there needed to be a voice from minority members of AEJMC on the executive board. And so how do we achieve that? And so there was a push to sort of, if I'm remembering this correctly, to make the MAC division something else, such as what has now become the Commission on the Status of Minorities, because commissions have a seat on the executive board. Well, as it turns out, we ended up with both, keeping the MAC division, and there was a lot of discussion about that, a lot of effort and energy behind maintaining the MAC division, but also we added the Commission on the Status of Minorities. We also then made the connection between the MAC division and the Commission on the Status of Minorities so that the MAC head, after the term was over, then became head of the Commission on the Status of Minorities. And so after serving as head of the MAC division, I then moved to Commission on Status of Minorities.